Good morning, and welcome to The Mix, the podcast where you have two pastors that talk about a little bit of everything.
Yeah, so one of the reasons we wanted to try to do this is just really, we get a lot of random questions sometimes, and we'll have a chance later in the segment to do some of those, but really wanted just to have kind of a low-key conversation for us to just be able to just go around and answer questions, talk about things that we
have our mugs.
I don't know about that, but I don't know. It's just a low-key format where we can probably address some topics that maybe wouldn't fit like in sermons, and we get a fair amount of inquiry about that or discussion. So that's kind of my flavor on it. And we'll mix it up with some fun stuff in there too, and just have a lot of fun. That's
well, before we jump in, why don't you tell them who you are, why you're qualified to answer any of these questions to begin with?
I don't think any of us are qualified.
Okay. Some of us are more qualified than others, maybe.
Yeah. So I don't know. It's basically like you put your 2 cents out there, and hopefully it helps some people navigate some tough stuff, right? There's, as far as pastors, like my name's Doug, and you're Aaron, of course, but that's, I think when it comes down to, as pastors, the only thing we really consider authoritative is the Word of God, right? So yeah. So my opinion, as I say often, my opinion isn't any more valuable than anyone else's. It may be a thought-out opinion. So I would suggest that a well-thought-out opinion is better than opinion is the lowest kind of wisdom. So it doesn't take any fact. It doesn't take anything to have an opinion, right? So hopefully what we have is we have something that intersperses more than just opinion into some things. I mean, there's some times to just talk about opinion, have fun discussions, but hopefully there's some intelligent thought and maybe some what we would call proverbial wisdom snuck in there as well.
So it's okay to have an opinion. It just is a lot better if an opinion has some stuff to back it up. So it becomes more of a position rather than just, this is what I think because this is what I think and that's how I think. Too much thinking.
Well, actually, there's not a lot of thinking that goes into those statements.
Very
That's
true.
The whole point.
Very true.
You know, I mean, in college, I took some philosophy. I really enjoyed that. It's really how to think well, how to formulate good thoughts, and then obviously from that formulate good discussions, arguments, opinions, or takes on things. So I try to go through life using your intellect over your emotion to try to engage things. So hopefully some of that will be brought here.
I too try to use intellect. It just doesn't always come out as intellect. Sometimes it might come out as goofiness.
I'll second that.
But there's intellect in there, so. Speaking of intellect, what we're going to do is right now we're going to jump into our first topic today. We're going to start with the morning mix. The morning mix is kind of a way for us to wake up a little bit. We're all kind of, we're still drinking our coffee. For some of us, it's coffee or tea. For others, it's, Kickstart. But
no coffee here.
We're all still trying to wake up a little bit. And so just a little simple topic. Here's the topic that we have for today. Spicy food. How far is too far? It's a serious topic.
I don't know. I mean, I don't need as much spicy stuff as I used to. Like when I was back in the day, I'd grow some pretty hot peppers, and we had youth group kids that they thought it was great to try to have a little contest. I'd just have a pepper out there every time. We had Wednesday at my house, and the kids come over, and they'd try to take a nibble, and we'd just keep working up toward the top of it, until somebody tapped out, so to speak. And I don't know if that was the wisest thing to do, but it was fun until one of the guys decided to posture up and do that little, like, I'm bigger than everybody. And he just took the whole pepper and just put the whole thing in his mouth, started crunching.
Oh.
Now, this was, I can't remember if it was a hot cayenne, which I grew the hotter hot cayennes, which are around like 30,000 to 40,000 Scoville. Or it might have been one of my hot Portugals, which can go up to 80,000. And, man, I was out like in the front porch doing Lamaze classes with him, as he's trying to breathe and stuff. So I would say too hot is when you're debilitating yourself and require help. The second thing I would say about too hot, and I don't care how hot people, I mean, I'll use an example. I got a friend, Levi. I was picking him up one day back in the day, and he eats incredibly hot stuff. And he got into my truck the one day. I was just picking him up. We were going to work actually here at the church, and he was eating something. He says, "Hey, do you want some of this? I made this really great stuff." It was some kind of chicken curry type thing, and it was so hot. Like, he's sitting like further away than me and you, and like my eyes are watering so much. Like, I'm having a hard time. I roll down the window so I can get some fresh air because I'm not gonna be able to breathe or drive.
Very emotional experience for you.
It was a little over the top. Yeah. So I'm like, if like your heat is like debilitating others next to you, that could also be a problem.
It is a little difficult because you have those people out there who they don't tolerate spiciness whatsoever. I had a friend who thought that ketchup was spicy.
Come on.
For me, come on. Not like ketchup is what? Tomato, sugar, maybe a little vinegar.
Vinegar. So the vinegar is the only thing that would possibly be spicy. Then.
Pretty much. And I mean, vinegar's not spicy. It's just, it has a twang, if that's what you want.
A twang.
A twang.
Suddenly it's a Western condiment now.
Well, I'm from Indiana, so I can bring some Southern in here. But
I don't even know
I will
this.
say, for me, when it comes to spicy food, I like that little bit of kick. Now, your mouth doesn't need to have the living tar kicked out of it, but it's good to have a little bit of that heat. When I make, one of the dishes that I make for my wife and I, we make a chicken, bacon, spinach, tomato pasta. And I like adding red pepper flakes in there.
Pesto pasta type thing?
No, not pesto.
Not pesto.
It's heavy cream
all right,
with
all
the
right,
tomato in there.
All right,
Very tasty.
Well, I was trying to differentiate because when you start talking spinach, it could be either one.
Pesto's not, I'm not a pesto fan. But this pasta, one of my favorite pastas, but I like to put a lot of the pepper flakes in there. Now, pepper flakes to me, that's not really that.
So you just use it in red pepper flakes?
Yeah, just sprinkle them in there, mix them up. It's not really that spicy per se.
No, but they can get caught in your throat. That's the thing about them. Like, and if it gets stuck back there, then it's a problem, right?
I don't know. I enjoy in there. Sometimes she'll say that's a little too much. I like a little heat. I like to feel almost like I have a little bit of smoke coming out there. Now, I don't need my mouth to be on fire.
Gotcha.
But I like a little kick.
Yeah, a little kick is nice. Definitely like a little bit of spice, but I wouldn't say like I eat nearly as spicy stuff as I used to. My palate's kind of tamed down a little bit.
Well, once you get older,
or savory,
you kind of change the way that you're having spicy food anyway. When you're younger, a lot of spicy foods that you have, sometimes they're done just to show how strong and how great you are. I made the mistake of trying this at a restaurant called Quaker Steak and Lube. They had the atomic sauce.
Atomic wings there? Yeah.
And you had to sign the waiver saying you can't sue if something goes wrong. My dad was worried about me doing it, so I stuck my finger in the sauce, tried it. I waited like 5 minutes, because you know how some of those things kind of sneak up on you.
I mean, habaneros and stuff, they can creep up on you about for at least 2 minutes.
Didn't do anything in 5 minutes. I'm like, all right, I'll try a wing. They brought it out, and they had jalapenos on it to cool it down, which that should be a red flag right there. Jalapenos aren't really
I really dislike jalapenos. I don't like the taste.
In a good salsa. Not pickled jalapenos, but I took one bite. This chicken wing is this big. I took one bite. You literally could have counted to 3, and I had to run as fast as I could to the bathroom and just dump my face underwater, which is not what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, it's just like you're just forcing the capsaicin into your palate. That's
pretty
all you're
much. Doing. So, yeah, my mouth was on fire. I think for a good 2 hours.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, the closest they have some peppers down in Guatemala when we were down there, and they're called horse kicks. And they brought them around. They're like, oh, you like spicy stuff? Here, try one of these. And I'm telling you, the things are about like the size of a pencil eraser. I mean, they're super tiny. They're so small. I mean, like this big. I'm like, well, can it be that bad? Like, I've had a bite of habanero like that. And it's, it hurts, but it's tolerable, whatever. It's not bad. And it was so weird because, like, you eat this pepper, you just, bite it off and you chew it. And then you swallow it. And I'm like, it tastes like a green bell pepper. Mm-hmm. And then they're all looking at me like,
just waiting.
They're like, it's gonna hit, and it's just like when the beat drops type of thing. Mm-hmm. Like all of a sudden it was just like, bam! it just that's why they call them horse kicks. It's just like instant. All of a sudden, I guess it's the way the capsaicin is like mixed in with some kind of other thing. So your saliva has to break it down, and then all of a sudden it releases it all at once.
I picture you
it's so wild.
When you have that, like just seeing this light, like, okay, I'm coming home. It's time for me to come home. Little quick reminder, though, as far as peppers go, this isn't the truth for everything, but bigger is usually a lot milder. Smaller is a lot hotter.
Yeah, just pack a punch.
Try to keep that in mind. So, yeah, good spicy food. Good time to talk about it. But we're going to move on to the main mix. The main mix is the topic that we kind of talk about. Something a little more serious. Yeah. A good question that culture has today that they would really like a spiritual perspective on. And now, we're going to be answering a bunch of them. We don't want this to be a 2-hour-long show because that's a hard thing to sit through.
Yeah.
But the question today is actually one that is probably very culturally relevant today. Question I would say is this. We're talking about bridging the gap. How to have good conversations with those who disagree with us. Now, the problem that we have today is we have a very blunt kind of perspective of, if you disagree with me, I want nothing to do with you. You're a horrible person. Why is that the case?
Well, I would first of all say that one of the problems I have, and just generally in discussions like this, is I always say that prejudice paints with a broad brush, and I think that's part of the problem in our culture. We've become very comfortable with painting people with broad brushes, like all Democrats, all Republicans, all Christians, all whatever, Colts fans.
Listen, the only brush that we're being painted with Colts fans is a depression rate.
You guys are getting beaten with the brush. but yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the problem, right? Because as we go along, the issue we all, and I think it's inevitable. I think every person on the face of the planet, when they start into a conversation, you find it very, very difficult. I would say it's virtually impossible from a psychological perspective or sociological perspective, perhaps, to not make some surface judgments, like judge a book by its cover. So you look at somebody, and it's hard not to make assumptions, right? Like, we got a guy that comes to church, and he's just covered in tattoos, right? And so, like, he and I have talked about that. He's a good friend. He's a friend of yours.
Yeah.
And and he's like, man, I can sit there, and when I walk in, if I come into the church, then immediately, like, people are there. Like, he's been in the store and had, like, parents, like, take their children behind them to another aisle, stuff like that. And so I think when we look at people, it's really impossible. So already I would say the deck is stacked against us before anything happens, right? Like, let's say you had a neighbor, and let's say you're a Republican, they're Democrat, or Democrat, Republican, I don't care. And you both have yard signs out during election season. Let's just suppose that. And let's say that they're fairly new to the neighborhood, or you're new to the neighborhood. And I would suggest that if you're going to have your first conversation during political season, you walk over to their house, or they walk over to your door, and you both know that you have different political signs. I'm just suggesting, in the current mindset, or even just a general mindset, it might be challenging to have that discussion without some presuppositions starting to creep in. So I would say the first thing, before we even get out of the gate with the discussion, is for people to become aware more of their implicit biases. And that's a really loaded topic in our world today, right? Because, we talk about implicit prejudice, and people, there's a whole bunch of discussions, especially when I have discussions with some of my friends on the progressive side, or some of those things that, talk about it, like implicit racism and those kind of things. Like, we're automatically that. And I think that we have to be careful not to paint with broad brushes in any of those ways. And I think the interesting thing that I'm challenged to do, and certainly we talk about, some of my psychological background, is trying to make sure that when you talk with the person, you're talking with the person, not your imagination of who they are.
So not just going into looking at people with the biasm, but another problem that I've kind of noticed is that people will come in with their stance, and in the conversation, it's not just, I have this opinion about you just by what I look at you or anything, but it's also, let's have a conversation, and the first time someone steps on my toes against something I believe very strongly, then you are hateful and just horrible. And why is that? Why do people go right to that instead of having a conversation? What's the threatening
So
thing?
you're talking about the ability, or lack thereof, to have dialogue. So dialogue is a place where both people's perspectives can be considered and heard, right? And by heard, I'm not just talking like yelling over each other, because that's usually how a lot of those discussions go, right? Whoever gets the last word and the loudest word.
Pretty true.
But a dialogue is very different. A dialogue is something where you can talk, and I'm gonna patiently listen, and I'm gonna ask you pointed questions if you're really interested in what that might look like. I think a guy that does a really good job of that is Sean McDowell. He's an apologist. Some of the older folks that might listen might remember Josh McDowell, Evidence That Demands a Verdict. Sean is he's an apologist and has a podcast, but he interviews a lot of people, and he gets some heat for it, right?
Now, why are we talking about an apologist? Because I will never apologize for my faith.
Well, an apologist is simply someone who is going to defend a particular position.
Yeah, not about apologizing.
So that's all that means. But yeah, I mean, like I watch a lot of debates and different things like that, especially in theological circles and those. I enjoy that. I do a lot of reading on those things. I really enjoy the approach where someone can actually have an honest discussion where, like, I seriously am asking questions to learn, not to challenge. Like, I don't know. all of us have been kids at one point, right? And you're like, why do I have to do that? As a typical kid question, right? Well, you're not actually You're not actually asking that question like, Mom, Dad, I am really wondering what the logic behind your decision here is. I really want to understand what's going on. That's not at all. You are lodging an objection in the form of a question.
It's almost like, convince me. And
not even that.
You're already losing because you're telling them they can't do something they want to do.
You're lodging a protest. I mean, that's exactly, you have no interest in learning. So if you, just to finish up that little idea of dialogue, one of the things that I say to people is try to do two things. Number one is try to ask questions in order to learn, and try to listen in order not to respond, but to also learn. And so if you think about that, I mean, I'm a debater. We can talk about temperaments at some point, like Myers-Briggs, both of you, and I like ENTPs, right? So we're the classical debater type things. And it's really difficult in conversations for us to listen to people, not in order to respond. Mm-hmm. And you all know how it is, right? So you're sitting there and they're saying something, you're like, oh, I'm going to jump on that. Mm-hmm. And so as soon as you start doing that, that's kind of what defeats dialogue. And I'm not saying that those things shouldn't be addressed, but I'm saying there's a time in the conversation to address them, and it's probably not cutting them off.
Well, it's probably a way of doing it too, where
that's a whole different conversation.
It's not where you're just listening. You're like, okay, now I have ammunition. It's okay. Right. I've never considered that before.
Yeah, what I try to do is then ask follow-up questions to understand more, right? So instead of asking questions to like, why would you think that? Well, that's an objection question. That's a lodging a protest. How could you ever come to such a conclusion? That's another, that's a loaded question. It's not really I want to learn something. But you could ask a learning question that is genuine. You say, like, you never really considered that perspective. How did you come to that conclusion? Now that's a question that says, help me understand you more. And I think one of the things that we misunderstand is a lot of the discussions we get in with people across the aisle, very few people want to actually be convinced, like to change their position. They believe that they have a very sound position, and they've thought it out. They think it's well-founded in truth, logic, feelings, whatever it is. They have really, in their mind, good reasons for why they think that. Like if I came in here today and I said, my objective in this conversation is to help you become an atheist. But, that might put up some barriers in that conversation pretty quickly. Or maybe, you'd appreciate me being honest about it, but you probably have a different conversation than normal. Mm. And so I don't know. I just think it's one of those things where most people don't necessarily want to win an argument. And that's my opinion. And that's a loaded statement. There's a lot of people that would disagree with that. Mm-hmm. And they would want to win that argument with me. And I'd probably be willing to have it because I enjoy arguments. As far as if they're friendly and at the end of it, we're still friends. I'm fine with those.
Right.
But lately I've been kind of predating or prefacing is the word I want. Prefacing some of those conversations with people I know are ideologically very different from me. Mm. And I'm saying I'm willing to have this debate or this discussion with you if we can agree at the end we're still going to walk away as friends. Mm. And, some people are like, well, that seems like a really weird way to start a conversation, but is what I'm trying to communicate. And these are people I know, right? Mm-hmm. I'm trying to communicate, listen, our relationship, the friendship is important to me on a higher level and deeper level than the ideological positions we might have.
Would you say the same thing with people that you don't know?
With the people I don't know, I would probably obviously not have a relationship to call upon, so I'd be less willing to do that or less likely because there's no common relational ground. But I would ask more of the questions to understand because I would still base my discussion or want to on the premise they don't necessarily always want to win or convince me. What they want to do, and here it is, they want to be heard. Mm. And I think most of the frustration, like if you look at the political dialogue that's out there, a lot of the, I tried talking about this with a lot of people, like with the whole thing with Donald Trump and people like, how did he get elected and whatever. And that's another discussion for another day. But one of the things that I talked about with people is there's a whole group of people who feel that they have been excluded from the political discussion. Mm. And that's true on both the right and the left. And so what it's doing is those people who feel that they've been pushed to the margins. And we talk about the polarization of discussion. And let's just use the political one because it's a convenient discussion here. when you think of that ideological divide in like the political, polarization, I think a lot of it is the people at the fringes have felt disenfranchised. And so they want to be heard, and they want to be adding their voices to the dialogue or the discussion. Some of them want to just win. Some of them want to argue. Some of them want to just gain power. Absolutely, that's true. But I think if you talk to the rank and file, not the people who are in the political stuff, and doing all their political stunts just, so that they rile up their bases. But I'm talking about the Joe Schmo living on the street that just has like a very liberal or very conservative position. A lot of those people, they just appreciate being heard in a conversation.
In this conversation, we also have to look at people having these conversations on social media. Now, this has been kind of a minefield. How would you suggest those go?
They don't.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to be a keyboard warrior. We see all kinds of people doing that, right? And I don't know if you understand, and people just don't think about this. Like, I talk to my kids all the time. I'm like, listen, they've got friends, my girls have boyfriends and such. And I'm like, listen, texting is, just use texting, for example. Texting is great for giving information, horrible for communication. Right. And the reason it's horrible for communication is because you can't see anything of this. And everybody knows this old adage, like, the majority of our communication and when we have conversations is nonverbal, right? And so, like, I try to do this. If I know I'm going to have a hard conversation with somebody, I won't even want to have it on the phone. The phone's better because you can at least hear inflection of the voice. And there's a lot of information and tone, right? So I really long for those discussions. I think if they're going to be personally productive for people, have them face-to-face. And not in a crowd necessarily, unless the group wants to be part of that discussion. There's nothing worse, I think, than being hijacked into a discussion. Right. While two people are kind of arguing at the dinner table. That's why they say, like family gatherings don't discuss politics and religion, that kind of stuff. Because often what happens, you have two people that are maybe on opposite polarizations, and they want to have this conversation. Everybody else is held hostage at the table, right? And so it's really bad form to do that in any capacity. But certainly as Christians, I would say it's unloving to do that. And so we want to be considerate of other people. And if everybody in that, group of people wants to have that discussion, then make sure that everybody's part of the discussion and everybody's doing well in it, and make sure that it's not getting off the rails. And if it is, then I would be the first to jump in and say, listen, man, I don't really want to be part of a whole bunch of debate and all this kind of stuff. I mean, if we want to have a casual conversation, that's fine, but we didn't come here to argue.
Right. Family gatherings should be kind of a fun thing. If you guys have any more questions about this topic, know that they could be emailed to either one of us at our what do you call those things with the email? The email addresses that we have. So you can email us your questions. You could just communicate with us anytime, and we would be happy to engage with you even more on some of these things. Well, we are at our final session for today, the final topic. We have this thing called Mixed Bag. What we're going to be doing is, in the future, we're going to have a nice little baggie right here filled with questions that you have. Questions. Now, these questions can be serious. They could be silly. They could be...
whatever you want to ask.
Whatever you want to ask. Pretty much the sky's the limit.
You can address them to one or the other, or we can just bounce them back and forth, or we can just say, hey, this is your discussion. So
pretty much. And when we post this video, we will take all the questions that you guys put in the comments, and we will put them on a piece of paper, put them in a bag, and we'll just draw them randomly at the end of the show. We have 5 different questions today. We'll try to do a few here and there.
That's fine, but remember, the whole thing is try to answer it in 10 seconds or so.
That's okay. That's gonna be a tough one, but we'll do this. Okay, so
maybe 20 seconds.
We'll start with it. We'll start with an easy one. So, comedy versus drama. Now, I of course love drama. The Notebook, Walk to Remember. I mean, okay, I'm joking. Comedy. It's a lot. No. It's very lighthearted. I want to relax. Drama gets me tense.
So we're talking about actually like movie genres. We're not like talking like drama, like as in like theater versus, going to a comedy show. That's how I read it. Like I'd pick a comedy show over most. I have a few like theater things I really enjoy, and I think theater is wonderful and creative and enjoyable. But so I guess I'd probably, for me, depend on the mood.
Comedy all the way. I love the stuff, but comedy for sure. Now, this one I'm going to put to you because I can't have this because this would wreck me. Chicken Alfredo or beef stroganoff? Which one would you choose?
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, for me, it would be neither. I love my wife way too much.
Who's making it?
We'll say you.
All right.
You're making it.
Yeah. So, I mean, stroganoff, if people like cheat, I think stroganoff, in order to be good, has to have like a really good flour-based roux. Otherwise, it's just not real. And Alfredo, you can cheat a little bit out of you can buy some Alfredo sauce, and it's not as good, but it's
kind of in the jar. It's doable.
You can get there with it.
Okay.
But I don't think you can do that with stroganoff. So that's if it's homemade to homemade, then I'm probably going to go with stroganoff. I just like beef.
And that was the mixed bag. What we're going to be doing at the end is we're going to be putting these comments in a bag. And like I said, we'll be pulling a few of them out for you guys to answer some of the questions that you guys have. They could be serious, silly questions about us, whatever you want to know. If you're interested in asking any of these questions, feel free to send it to our email, send it to the comments down below, and every time we'll just put a few in and draw some random ones, and we'll see where we go.
Yeah, I think it'll be fun. I like the Q&A type of format with people. Obviously, when you teach a lot, which we do, it's hard sometimes to know if you're hitting the spot. So the best way to do that is questions, and questions are how we learn. So if people have questions, whatever it is, I mean, some of them I'm sure will be weird, like your Batman Iron Man thing, but some of them, may just stuff. Maybe, just serious and whatever. So we can do all those things.
And just know that if there's a question that's brought up that would take more than a few seconds to answer, it will be acknowledged in possibly a later episode.
Yeah, some of those things I'm sure we'll get to be like, hey, about like big one. Like one of the ones we talked about earlier as a potential question was like prayer, right? Well, I can answer that like in 20 seconds, so to speak, but it's obviously there's more that goes to that
It'd
topic.
be better to hear the more.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. That is all the time that we have today. Thank you for joining us in the mix. I'm Pastor Aaron.
Pastor Doug, and awesome. Love you guys.